The jug was getting heavier. Marin's arms trembled as she lifted it again, pouring wine into yet another goblet with hands that had long since gone numb. The great hall was packed with nobles, human and Lycan alike, celebrating the alliance that had brought them together. And she was just a servant, invisible, disposable, expected to pour until she collapsed. "Faster, girl." Lord Harwick's voice cut through the noise, sharp and cold. "The Lycan King's cup is nearly empty. Do you want to embarrass me?" She didn't answer. She had learned years ago that answering only made things worse. Marin had been in Lord Harwick's household since she was 11, sold by parents who couldn't afford to feed her, purchased by a man who saw servants as furniture with pulses. 12 years of scrubbing floors and serving meals and enduring whatever cruelties his mood demanded. 12 years of learning to be silent, to be small, to be nothing. Tonight was the worst it had ever been. The feast had been going for 6 hours. 6 hours of carrying heavy pitchers, of weaving through crowds, of bowing and scraping and pretending her back wasn't screaming in agony. Lord Harwick had forbidden the servants from resting. Appearances mattered, he said. The Lycan King was watching. Marin hadn't looked at the Lycan King. She hadn't dared. He sat at the high table like a shadow made flesh, enormous and terrifying, with eyes that glowed gold in the torchlight. The stories about him were legend. 200 years old, they said. A warrior who had never lost a battle. A beast who could tear a man apart with his bare hands. She kept her eyes on the floor and tried not to shake. "The King's cup," Lord Harwick hissed, grabbing her arm hard enough to bruise. "Now." Marin stumbled toward the high table, her vision blurring at the edges. When had she last eaten? Yesterday, perhaps. The day before. Lord Harwick didn't believe in wasting food on servants during feast preparations. She reached the Lycan King's place and lifted the jug. Her hands were shaking so badly that the wine sloshed against the sides, threatening to spill. She could feel the king's eyes on her, that burning golden gaze. But she didn't look up. Couldn't look up. "Just pour," she told herself. "Pour and walk away, and maybe you'll survive the night." She tilted the jug. Wine splashed across the table. The sound seemed to echo through the entire hall. Conversations stuttered to a halt. Marin stared in horror at the spreading crimson stain, at the drops that had landed on the Lycan King's sleeve, at the ruin of everything. "You clumsy fool!" Lord Harwick was there in an instant, his hand cracking across her face hard enough to send her stumbling. The jug slipped from her fingers and shattered on the stone floor. "Do you have any idea what you've done? On your knees. Apologize to the king." Marin dropped. Her cheek burned where he had struck her, and her knees screamed against the cold stone, and she could feel tears threatening to fall. She wouldn't cry. She wouldn't give him the satisfaction. "Forgive me, Your Majesty," she whispered to the floor. "I am worthless and clumsy, and I beg your—" "Stop." The voice was deep, commanding. It cut through the hall like a blade, silencing everything. Marin froze. She heard movement, the scrape of a chair, the heavy tread of boots. Then a pair of black leather shoes appeared in her vision, and she realized the Lycan King was standing directly in front of her. "Look at me." She couldn't disobey a king. Slowly, terrified, she raised her head. He was even more imposing up close. Massive shoulders, a warrior's build, a face carved from stone and shadow. His dark hair fell past his shoulders, and his jaw was tight with an emotion she couldn't read. But it was his eyes that held her frozen. molten gold, burning with an intensity that seemed to see straight through her. For a long moment, he simply looked at her. His nostrils flared slightly, and something flickered in his expression. Surprise, recognition, and then something fierce and possessive that made her heart stutter. Then he turned to Lord Harwick. "You struck her." It wasn't a question. Lord Harwick shifted nervously. "She spilled wine on you, Your Majesty. I was merely disciplining—" "You struck her," the king repeated, his voice dropping to something dangerous. "Because she spilled wine, after forcing her to serve for hours without rest, after starving her until she could barely stand." The hall had gone utterly silent. Maren could feel hundreds of eyes on her, but she couldn't look away from the Lycan king's face. "With respect, Your Majesty, she is my servant. I may discipline her as I see—" "She is not your servant anymore." The words fell like stones into still water. Lord Harwick's face went white. I beg your pardon?" The Lycan king reached down and took Maren's hand, gently, so gently, and helped her to her feet. She swayed, and his other hand steadied her waist, holding her upright with an ease that spoke of immense strength carefully controlled. "I am taking her," he said, his golden eyes never leaving Lord Harwick's face, "as compensation for the insult of being served by someone so clearly mistreated, unless you would like to argue the point." There was no threat in his voice. There didn't need to be. The promise of violence hung in the air like smoke. Lord Harwick's mouth opened, closed, opened again. "No, Your Majesty. Of course not. She is yours." "Yes," the Lycan king said softly. "She is." He turned to Maren, and his expression shifted, the fury banking into something warmer, softer. He shrugged off his cloak and draped it around her shoulders. It was heavy and warm and smelled of pine and wood smoke. "Can you walk?" She nodded, though she wasn't sure it was true. "Then come with me. You're safe now." He led her out of the great hall, his hand warm against her lower back, steady and grounding. She could feel the stairs following them. Shock, confusion, whispers already spreading like wildfire. The Lycan king had claimed a servant. The Lycan king had defended a human girl no one had ever noticed. They didn't stop until they reached a quiet corridor, far from the noise and the crowds. Only then did the king turn to face her, his golden eyes searching her face with an intensity that made her breath catch. "What is your name?" "Maren." Her voice came out as a rasp. "Maren Cole." "Maren." He said it slowly, like he was memorizing the shape of it. "I am Theron." She knew who he was. Everyone knew who he was. But hearing him give his name, just his name, without titles or formality, made something flutter in her chest. "Why?" The word escaped before she could stop it. "Why did you—" "I'm no one. I'm nothing. Why would you—" "You are not nothing." His voice was fierce. "You are not no one. You are—" He stopped, his jaw tightening, as if he was wrestling with something he couldn't quite say. "I'm what?" He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and cupped her bruised cheek in his palm. His touch was impossibly gentle, his skin warm against hers. "You are mine," he said quietly. "My mate, my fated. I knew it the moment I caught your scent across that hall." Maren stared at him, her mind refusing to process the words. Mate, fated, her. The servant who had been struck for spilling wine, who had been starving and exhausted and utterly invisible until 5 minutes ago. That's impossible, she whispered. Theron smiled, small and fierce and strangely tender. And yet, here we are. His thumb brushed her cheekbone, careful to avoid the bruise. I know you have no reason to believe me. I know you have no reason to trust me. But I promise you, Maren, I will never let anyone hurt you again. You are safe with me. Always. She should be terrified. She should pull away, demand to be returned to whatever life she had before. But his hand was warm on her face, and his eyes were soft in the torchlight, and for the first time in 12 years, someone was looking at her like she mattered, like she was worth saving. I don't understand any of this, she admitted. I know. He let his hand fall, taking a step back to give her space. You don't have to understand tonight. You just have to rest. Let me take care of you. He extended his hand, palm up, an invitation rather than a demand. Maren looked at his hand, then at his face, then back at his hand. She had spent 12 years learning that hope was dangerous, that trusting anyone led only to pain. But something in his golden eyes made her want to try. She took his hand. The Lycan King's castle was nothing like Lord Harwick's manor, where Harwick's home had been cold and draughty, full of dark corners and locked doors. Theron's castle blazed with warmth. Fires crackled in every hearth. Torches lined the corridors. Tapestries depicting forests and wolves and moonlit hunts covered the stone walls, turning fortress into something almost welcoming. Maren walked beside Theron in a daze, his cloak still wrapped around her shoulders, her mind struggling to process the last hour. She had been a servant. She had spilled wine. She had been struck. And then a king had taken her hand and called her his mate. None of it made sense. These will be your chambers, Theron said, stopping before a heavy wooden door. The rooms reserved for the queen. Maren's stomach dropped. I can't. Those aren't for someone like me. They are for my mate. His voice was gentle but firm. Which means they are for you. He pushed open the door, and Maren's breath caught. The room was enormous. A canopied bed, draped in deep blue velvet, dominated one wall, piled high with pillows and furs. Windows stretched from floor to ceiling, overlooking moonlit mountains. A fire blazed in a hearth large enough to stand in, and beside it sat a table laden with food. Roasted meat, fresh bread, cheese, fruit, pastries still warm from the oven. More food than Maren had seen in months. Eat, Theron said, guiding her toward the table. As much as you want. The kitchens have been instructed to bring you whatever you need, whenever you need it. She sank into a chair, her legs finally giving out. The smell of the food was overwhelming, making her stomach cramp with desperate hunger. But she hesitated, old habits dying hard. I'm allowed to eat this? All of it? Something dark flickered in Theron's eyes. You are allowed to eat anything you want. You will never go hungry again, Maren. I swear it. She ate. She tried to maintain some dignity, to pace herself, but hunger won. She devoured half the tray before she could stop herself, barely tasting the food, her body desperately absorbing what it had been denied for so long. Theron didn't watch her like she was an animal. He settled into a chair across from her, his golden eyes soft, his expression patient. He waited until she finally slowed, until she leaned back with her hands pressed to her stomach. Better? He asked. Yes. Her voice was stronger now. Thank you. You don't need to thank me for feeding you. That should have been the bare minimum. His jaw tightened. Lord Harwick will answer for how he treated you. I promise you that. He'll just deny it. He's a lord. I'm no one. You are not no one. Theron leaned forward, his eyes intense. You are my mate, my queen. Your word carries more weight than 100 lords. Maren shook her head, struggling to accept what he was saying. I don't understand how this works. The mate bond. I've heard stories, but I never thought... She trailed off. You never thought it would happen to you. I never thought anything would happen to me. I thought I would serve in Harwick's household until I died. That was my life. That was all I was ever going to have. Theron was quiet for a moment. Then he rose from his chair and crossed to kneel before her, putting himself below her eye level. The same gesture he had used in the corridor, making himself smaller, less threatening. The mate bond is a connection between souls, he said softly. Lycans recognize it instantly. A scent, a pull, an absolute certainty. I felt it the moment you walked into that hall. Before you even looked at me, I knew you were mine. But I'm human. I didn't feel anything. Humans experience the bond differently. It grows over time like a seed taking root. He reached out and took her hand, his fingers warm around hers. You may never feel it the way I do, but I hope, I pray, that you will come to care for me, that you will choose to stay. Choose? The word caught her off guard. You said I was yours. You took me from Lord Harwick like property. I took you because he was hurting you, and I couldn't watch it for another second. His voice roughened. But you are not property, Maren. Not to him, and not to me. If you want to leave, I will let you go. It will break me, but I will respect your choice. She stared at him, searching for the lie, the trick, the hidden cruelty. She found nothing but earnest golden eyes and a face tight with barely contained hope. You would really let me go? After claiming me in front of everyone? Yes. The word cost him. She could see it in the tension of his shoulders. I want you to stay because you want to, not because you feel trapped, not because you have nowhere else to go. Maren was quiet for a long moment. She looked around the room, the soft bed, the crackling fire, the food still waiting on the table. She thought about what waited for her if she left. No family, no home, just another household where she would scrub and serve and starve. Or worse, Lord Harwick's fury at being embarrassed in front of the Lycan king. I have nowhere else to go, she admitted quietly. Even if I wanted to leave, I don't have anything. No money, no skills except serving, no one who would take me in. Then stay. Theron squeezed her hand gently. Not as a servant, not as a prisoner. Stay as my guest, and let me show you who I really am. Let me prove that you can trust me. Why does it matter so much to you? We met an hour ago. Because I've been waiting 200 years for you. His voice dropped to something raw and honest. 2 centuries of loneliness, of watching other Lycans find their mates while I remained alone. I had begun to think I would never find you. That fate had forgotten me. His thumb traced circles on the back of her hand. And then you walked into that hall, shaking and exhausted, and still somehow standing, and everything I had ever wanted was suddenly right in front of me. Maren's throat tightened. No one had ever spoken to her like this. No one had ever looked at her like she was precious, like she mattered, like she was something worth waiting centuries for. I don't know how to be what you want, she whispered. I don't know how to be a queen or a mate or anything other than what I've always been. You don't have to be anything but yourself. He rose, releasing her hand, and stepped back to give her space. Rest tonight. Eat. Sleep in a real bed for the first time in years. Tomorrow we'll talk more. But for now, just let yourself be cared for. He moved toward the door, and something in Maren lurched, a sudden, irrational fear of being left alone. Theron. He stopped, turning back to her. Thank you, she said softly, for taking the jug, for saying enough. No one has ever... She swallowed hard. No one has ever stopped them before. His expression softened with something that looked almost like pain. Then everyone else was blind. And I am grateful they were, because their blindness led you to me. He left, closing the door gently behind him. Maren sat in the silence, surrounded by warmth and comfort and more kindness than she had known in 12 years. She should be suspicious. She should be waiting for the trap to spring. But as she crawled into the massive bed and pulled the soft covers up to her chin, she found she couldn't muster the fear. For the first time in as long as she could remember, she felt something dangerously close to safe. 1 week passed, and Maren learned that kings could be kind. Theron gave her space. He joined her for meals, but sat across the table rather than beside her, close enough to talk, but far enough to avoid crowding. He walked with her through the castle gardens, showing her the rose bushes and the herb plots and the ancient oak tree where he had carved his initials as a child. He asked questions about her preferences, what foods she liked, what colours pleased her, whether she preferred mornings or evenings, and remembered every answer. It was disorienting. Maren kept waiting for the cruelty to emerge, for the patient facade to crack and reveal the monster underneath. But day after day, she found only gentleness, only warmth, only a man who looked at her like she hung the moon. She didn't know what to do with any of it. The servants treated her like royalty. They called her "my lady" and bowed when she passed and brought her anything she could possibly want. Martha, the head housekeeper, had taken her under her wing, helping her choose gowns from the overflowing wardrobe, teaching her how to style her hair, clucking over how thin she was, and making sure she ate at every opportunity. The king has never been like this, Martha confided one afternoon, helping Maren into a gown of soft green wool. 200 years, and I've never seen him smile so much. You're good for him, my lady. Maren didn't know how to respond to that. She didn't know how to be good for anyone. On the 8th night, the nightmares came. She was back in Lord Harwick's cellar, the one he used for punishment, cold and dark, and filled with things that skittered in the corners. She could hear Lady Harwick's voice above, laughing about the servant girl who had dropped a plate. Leave her there until morning. Maybe she'll learn to be more careful. The walls pressed in. The darkness swallowed her whole. She couldn't breathe, couldn't scream, couldn't... Maren woke, gasping, her heart slamming against her ribs, her nightgown damp with sweat. The room was dark. The fire had burned low, and for a terrible moment she didn't know where she was. The cellar. She was in the cellar. She was trapped and alone, and... A knock at the door, urgent, concerned. Maren? I heard you cry out. Are you all right? Theron's voice cut through the panic, pulling her back to the present. She wasn't in the cellar. She was in his castle. She was safe. I'm fine, she called, but her voice cracked on the words. A pause. May I come in? She should say no. It was the middle of the night, and she was barely dressed. and she was shaking so hard her teeth were chattering. But the darkness was pressing in, and the echoes of the cellar were still ringing in her ears, and she couldn't bear to be alone. Yes. The door opened slowly. Theron stood in the doorway, wearing only loose trousers and an unlaced shirt, his dark hair dishevelled from sleep. His golden eyes found her immediately, scanning her face with fierce concern. "You're shaking." He crossed the room in 3 strides and dropped to his knees beside the bed. "Tell me what happened." "Just a nightmare." She tried to smile, but it felt more like a grimace. "I'm used to them." "That doesn't make them acceptable." He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand. His fingers were warm, his grip steady. "Will you tell me what you dreamed?" The words came out before she could stop them. The cellar, the darkness, the endless hours of waiting for someone to remember she existed. She told him about the rats that had once crawled across her feet, about the time she had been left for 3 days because Lady Harwick had forgotten. She told him things she had never told anyone, secrets she had buried so deep she had almost convinced herself they weren't real. Theron listened without interrupting. His expression grew darker with each revelation, his free hand clenching into a fist on his knee, but his grip on her fingers remained gentle. When she finally fell silent, her throat raw and her eyes burning, he spoke. "How old were you? The first time?" 12. The word came out flat. "I had broken a vase. It was an accident. I tripped carrying it up the stairs. But Lady Harwick said I needed to learn. She said servants who couldn't be careful didn't deserve light or warmth." A sound escaped Theron's throat, low and dangerous, more wolf than man. His eyes blazed gold in the dim light. "She put a child in a cellar for breaking a vase." "I wasn't a child to them. I was property." Maren looked down at their joined hands. "I was never a person. Just hands to carry things, a body to clean up after them. They didn't see me as human. They were wrong." His voice was fierce, absolute. "They were blind and cruel and wrong, Maren. You are not property. You have never been property. You are a person, brave and resilient and strong, and every single person who treated you otherwise deserves to suffer for it." Tears slipped down her cheeks. She tried to blink them back, but they kept coming. Years of grief and pain finally finding release. "I don't know how to believe that," she whispered. "I've spent so long being nothing, feeling nothing, wanting nothing because wanting only led to disappointment." She finally met his eyes. "How am I supposed to suddenly believe I matter?" Theron reached up and cradled her face in his hands. His palms were warm, calloused from centuries of wielding swords, impossibly gentle against her skin. "You don't have to believe it all at once," he said softly. "You just have to let me show you, every day, every moment, until the truth sinks in so deep that you can't deny it anymore." "What truth?" "That you are precious." His thumbs brushed away her tears. "That you are worthy of kindness and safety and love. That you are not garbage to be discarded or property to be used. You are treasure, Maren. You always have been. The people who couldn't see it were fools." A sob caught in her throat. No one had ever spoken to her like this. No one had ever held her face in their hands and called her treasure like they meant it. "I don't feel like treasure," she admitted. "I feel broken, like they took something from me that I can never get back." "You're not broken." His voice was fierce. "You're a survivor. There's a difference." He leaned closer, his forehead nearly touching hers. "And whatever they took from you, whatever pieces you think are missing, I will spend the rest of my very long life helping you find them again. Marin's breath caught. His face was so close, his golden eyes burning into hers with an intensity that made her heart race. She could feel his breath on her lips, could see the restraint in the tension of his shoulders. "Theron," she breathed, "I want to kiss you." The words were strained, tight with control. "I have wanted to kiss you since the moment I saw you, but not like this. Not when you're hurting and vulnerable and might regret it." "What if I won't regret it?" His eyes darkened. "Then tell me when you're certain, when you've had time to think." "I'll wait, Marin. However long you need." He started to pull back, and she caught his wrist. "Stay." The word came out before she could stop it. "Please, I don't want to be alone tonight." Something softened in his expression. He searched her face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "I'll stay." He settled onto the bed beside her, keeping a careful distance, and opened his arms in silent invitation. Marin hesitated only a moment before she curled against his side, her head on his chest, his heartbeat steady beneath her ear. He was warm, solid, safe in a way she had never known another person could be. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" "For seeing me, when no one else did." His arm tightened around her. "I will always see you, Marin. You are impossible to overlook." She closed her eyes and let herself be held, wrapped in warmth and comfort, and the impossible promise of someone who actually cared. She was falling for him. She knew it now, could feel it like a tide pulling her toward shore, relentless and terrifying and impossible to resist. For the first time, she didn't want to resist. Lord Harwick came on the 10th day. Marin was in the library when she heard the commotion, raised voices echoing through the corridors, the stamp of boots, a familiar voice making demands that sent ice flooding through her veins. She knew that voice. She had spent 12 years learning to fear it. By the time she reached the Great Hall, Theron was already there, standing before his throne with his arms crossed and murder in his eyes. Lord Harwick stood in the centre of the room, flanked by 2 guards who looked deeply uncomfortable, his face red with indignation. "Stolen from me," he was shouting. "That girl is my property, bound by legal contract. I demand her return." "Your property." Theron's voice was flat, dangerous. "The woman you starved, the woman you struck, the woman you locked in cellars for breaking dishes." Lord Harwick's face paled slightly, but he pressed on. "She has exaggerated. Servants always exaggerate. I merely disciplined her as was my right." "You're right." Theron took a step forward, and Lord Harwick stumbled back. "You believe you have the right to abuse a woman? To beat her? To treat her like an animal?" "She is an animal. She's nothing but a servant, purchased and paid for. I have documents proving my ownership. Unless you compensate me for her value, I will petition the human courts." "Her value." Theron's voice dropped to something barely human. "You speak of her like livestock." Marin stepped into the hall. Every eye turned to her. Lord Harwick's widening with surprise, Theron's blazing with concern, the guards flickering with uncertainty. She walked forward on legs that felt steadier than they should, her chin high, her hands clenched at her sides. Lord Harwick's expression shifted, surprise melting into something uglier, something calculating. "There you are." He spread his arms wide, as if greeting an errant child. "Come now, girl. This foolishness has gone on long enough. Return with me, and I'll consider forgiving your disobedience." Maren stopped a dozen feet from him. No. The word hung in the air, simple and absolute. Lord Harwick's smile flickered. "I beg your pardon?" I said no. Her voice was stronger than she'd ever heard it. "I'm not going back with you. I'm not your property. I'm not anyone's property." "You ungrateful little wretch." The mask slipped, revealing the cruel man she remembered. "After everything I did for you, feeding you, housing you, giving you a purpose, you starved me." Maren stepped closer, and he actually flinched. "You locked me in a cellar when I was 12 years old because I dropped a vase. You let your wife beat me for crimes I didn't commit. You worked me until my hands bled and called it discipline." Her voice rose, years of swallowed rage finally finding release. "You didn't give me a purpose. You gave me a prison. And the only reason I survived was because I learned to make myself small enough that you might forget I existed." Lord Harwick's face twisted with fury. "How dare you speak to me like that? I am a lord of the realm. You are nothing but a servant, a piece of property I purchased with good coin." "She is not property." Theron's voice cut through the air like a blade. He moved to stand beside Maren, his presence a wall of barely contained violence. "She is my mate, my queen, and you will address her with respect, or you will not address her at all." Lord Harwick's mouth opened, closed, opened again. "This is outrageous. You cannot simply claim my servants because you fancy them." "I can do whatever I please." Theron smiled, and it was terrifying. "I am the Lycan king, and what pleases me right now is watching you realize how badly you've miscalculated." He gestured, and a servant appeared with a sheaf of documents. "I sent riders to the human courts last week," Theron continued, his voice deceptively calm, "to investigate your household, your treatment of servants, your business practices." Lord Harwick went pale. "You had no right." "I found some interesting things. Unpaid debts, falsified contracts, several servants who claim they were purchased under false pretenses and never given the opportunity to work off their indentures." Theron's eyes blazed gold. "The human courts are very interested in speaking with you, Lord Harwick, as are several creditors you seem to have forgotten about." This is blackmail. This is justice." Theron stepped forward, and Lord Harwick stumbled back until his shoulders hit the wall. "You came here expecting to reclaim a woman you abused for 12 years. Instead, you've walked into the consequences of your own cruelty." He leaned in close, his voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried through the entire hall. "Leave my territory, never return, and pray that I don't decide to share what I've learned with every noble house in the human kingdoms." His lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Because I promise you, Lord Harwick, what I know would destroy you far more thoroughly than anything the courts could do." Lord Harwick fled. There was no other word for it. He scrambled for the door like a rat escaping a fire, his guards stumbling after him, his dignity abandoned somewhere on the stone floor. Within moments, the hall was empty, except for Maren and Theron, and the echo of hoofbeats fading into the distance. Silence stretched between them. Then Maren let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding, and her legs gave out. Theron caught her before she hit the ground. He gathered her into his arms and held her, one hand cradling the back of her head, the other wrapped around her waist. "You're shaking," he murmured. "I know." She laughed weakly. "I can't believe I said all that. I can't believe I stood up to him." "I can." He pulled back just enough to look at her face. You were magnificent, Maren. You were brave and fierce and absolutely glorious. I was terrified. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's acting despite it. His hand came up to cup her cheek, his thumb tracing her cheekbone. I have never been more proud of anyone in my 200 years. Something cracked open in Maren's chest. Some wall she had built so long ago she had forgotten it was there. Tears burned in her eyes, spilling over before she could stop them. I don't want to go back, she whispered. I don't want to be that girl anymore. The one who makes herself small, who swallows her voice, who expects nothing because expecting hurts too much. You don't have to be. His voice was fierce. You never have to be that girl again. I want to stay. The words came out stronger, surer. Not because I have nowhere else to go, not because you saved me. I want to stay because you see me, because you make me feel like I matter. Because when I'm with you, I feel like I might actually be the person you think I am. Theron's breath caught. Maren, I choose you. She reached up and placed her hand over his heart, feeling it pound beneath her palm. I choose this. Whatever this is. Whatever it becomes. I choose you, Theron, with my whole heart. His control shattered. He kissed her like a man dying of thirst who had finally found water. His hands tangled in her hair, tilting her head back, and his mouth claimed hers with a desperate tenderness that made her knees buckle. She grabbed his shirt to steady herself, and he responded by pulling her closer, until there was no space between them at all. The kiss deepened. Maren had never been kissed before. Not like this. Not with passion and reverence and the unmistakable promise of forever. She felt it in her bones, in her blood, in the place where his heart beat against hers. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Theron pressed his forehead to hers. Mine, he growled. You're mine. Yours, she agreed. And you're mine. He laughed, a sound of pure, disbelieving joy, and kissed her again. Around them, the hall was empty and silent. But Maren didn't feel alone anymore. For the first time in 12 years, she felt like she was exactly where she belonged. They were married beneath the full moon. 1 month after the night, Theron had taken the jug from her trembling hands. The ceremony was held in the castle gardens, surrounded by torchlight and moonflowers and the gathered masses of Theron's kingdom. Maren stood among the roses in a gown of deep silver silk, her dark hair threaded with tiny white blossoms, her hands steady for the first time in as long as she could remember. She wasn't shaking anymore. Theron waited for her at the heart of the garden, dressed in black and silver, his golden eyes blazing with a love so fierce it took her breath away. When he saw her approaching, his expression shifted, wonder and reverence, and something almost like disbelief. You're beautiful, he murmured as she reached him. You're the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. You've said that before. And I'll say it every day for the rest of our lives. He took her hands in his fingers warm and steady. I still can't believe you're real, that you're here, that you chose me. I'll always choose you. The vows they spoke were ancient Lycan words, promises that bound them not just in this life, but in whatever came after. When Theron slid a ring onto her finger, a band of white gold shaped like intertwining vines, Maren felt something settle into place inside her. A sense of belonging she had never known was possible. Mine, Theron whispered. My mate. My queen. My heart. Yours, she whispered back. Always and forever yours. He kissed her beneath the watching moon, and the wolves who had gathered at the edge of the garden howled their approval. Maren laughed against his mouth, overwhelmed by the sheer impossible wonder of it all. 1 month ago, she had been a servant, invisible, disposable, ordered to paw until her hands shook. Now she was a queen. The wedding feast lasted until dawn. There was music and dancing and more food than Maren had ever seen in her life. Servants moved through the crowd with jugs of wine, and every time one passed, Theron's hand tightened on hers, a silent reminder that she would never carry a jug again. That night, in the quiet of their chambers, he showed her what it meant to be cherished. He was gentle, impossibly, heartbreakingly gentle. He worshipped her with patient hands and whispered reverence, stopping constantly to ask if she was all right, if she wanted to continue, if there was anything she needed. It was nothing like the violence she had witnessed in Harwick's household, nothing like the cruelty she had learned to expect from the world. It was warmth and closeness, and the overwhelming sensation of being treasured. Afterward, she lay curled against his chest, listening to his heartbeat slow. "I love you," she said softly. The words had been building for weeks, maybe longer. She had been afraid to say them, afraid they would shatter the dream. But lying here, wrapped in his arms, she couldn't hold them back anymore. Theron went still. Then his arms tightened around her, and he pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "I love you, Maren." His voice was thick with emotion. "I have loved you since the moment I saw you trembling in that hall, still standing despite everything they had done to break you. I will love you until the stars burn out and the moons fall from the sky." She smiled against his skin. "That's a long time." "Not nearly long enough." He tilted her chin up and kissed her softly. "Not nearly enough for everything I want to give you." 6 months later, news reached them from the human territories. Lord Harwick was ruined. The investigation Theron had initiated had uncovered far more than unpaid debts and falsified contracts. It had revealed a pattern of abuse stretching back decades. Servants purchased under false pretenses and worked to death. Women who had disappeared under mysterious circumstances. Bribes paid to officials who should have stopped him years ago. The human courts had stripped him of his title. His estate had been seized to pay his creditors. His wife had fled to distant relatives, abandoning him to face the consequences alone. The last anyone had heard, Lord Harwick was living in a boarding house in the capital, begging for work from nobles who refused to acknowledge he existed. Maren read the report with Theron at her side, his hand warm in hers. "How do you feel?" he asked quietly. She considered the question carefully. 6 months ago, she might have felt guilty. She might have wondered if she should feel pity for the man who had tormented her for 12 years. But she wasn't that girl anymore. "I feel free," she said finally. "He spent 12 years making me believe I was nothing, that I deserved every terrible thing that happened to me." She looked up at Theron. "But I wasn't nothing. I was never nothing. He was just too cruel and too blind to see it. His blindness was his loss." Theron pressed a kiss to her forehead. "And my gain." "Our gain," she corrected softly. "We found each other because of him. If he hadn't been so terrible, I might never have spilled that wine. You might never have said enough." Theron smiled, that slow, tender smile that still made her heart skip. "Then I suppose I should thank him, for being cruel enough to drive you into my arms." "Don't thank him. He doesn't deserve it." Maren leaned up and kissed him. "Just love me instead." "Always," he murmured against her lips. forever and always. 1 year after the night in the Great Hall, Maren stood on the castle balcony and watched the sun set over the kingdom she now called home. So much had changed. She was no longer the trembling servant who had expected to collapse from exhaustion. She was a queen, confident, capable, beloved by her people and her husband alike. She had learned to read and write, to negotiate treaties, to stand beside Theron as an equal partner rather than a frightened girl. But more than that, she had learned to stand. Arms wrapped around her from behind, and she leaned back into Theron's chest with a contented sigh. "What are you thinking about?" he murmured against her hair. "The feast," she admitted. "The night we met. How terrified I was. How certain I was that my hands would never stop shaking. And now?" She held up her hands, steady and strong in the fading light. "Now I know they only shook because no one had ever told them they could be still." Theron turned her in his arms, looking down at her with an expression that still made her breath catch after all this time. "I love you," he said. "Have I mentioned that today?" "Only 4 times. You're slipping." He laughed and pulled her closer. "I love you, Maren. My mate. My queen. My heart. I will love you until the end of time and beyond." "I love you too," she whispered. "Thank you for seeing me. Thank you for saying enough. Thank you for being patient and kind, and everything I never dared to dream of." He kissed her then, soft and sweet and full of promise. As the sun sank below the horizon and painted the sky in shades of gold and crimson, she had been ordered to pause until her hands shook. Now those same hands held the heart of a king, and they would never tremble again. If you loved this story, don't forget to like and subscribe for more tales of fated mates, fierce kings, and the love that conquers all. Hit the notification bell so you never miss an upload, and tell me in the comments, what would you do if the Lycan king said enough and took your hand?